Yeah.
Today is Tuesday, September 14th, 2021. I'd like to call the Board of Commissioners meeting to order. Madam Clerk, which happens to be a brand new Katie Zanotti, welcome.
Thank you.
If you'd call roll, please.
Certainly. Fox. Present. Krieger.
Here.
Begic.
Here.
Coonan.
Here.
Herrick.
Here.
Radke. Here. Johnson.
Here.
We're good to go.
Present.
All right, thank you. We'll stand for the invocation. At the end of the invocation, before the pledge, I'd like to take a moment of silence for the victims of 9/11 and their families.
Lord, we come before you this afternoon, asking once again that you bless this session of the County Commission, be with this board this day and guide them so that the decisions made today and always will benefit every citizen of this community. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We have the minutes before you. A motion to approve would be in order.
So moved.
Support.
Any discussion on the minutes? With none, all those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next on our agenda, we have citizens' input. If there's anybody from the public that wish to address the board, now would be the time to come up. If you would. Name and address, and with public input, you've got 5 minutes.
Hi, my name is Dr. Selvaraj. I am a constituent of Monitor Township. I'm a physician of 25 years, now retired, with a specialty in cardiology. I have spoken with the health department directly, as well as Mr. Barsha. We know each other fairly decently well. And I just wanted to come here to, and I'm also a part of a group called Bay County Parents Against Close Contact Quarantines. And we are an advocate for freedom of choice in terms of medical freedom, as well as parental rights. So I wanted to come and assert my sovereign authority as a constituent. I am part of We the People and have sovereign authority granted by God and the US and state constitutions. We do not get our authority from the government. We get our authority from God and the US Constitution. As elected officials, you have taken an oath to protect and defend the US and state constitutions. Non-elected government officials, local and state health departments have no constitutional authority to dictate what people do with their bodies in terms of masking, vaccines, and testing. Their job is to create policy, not laws. Policies are not legally enforceable. Policy does not equate mandate. Policy does not equal force or coercion at all. These unelected bureaucratic officials do not have the constitutional authority to create any mandates, rules, requirements that force people to put anything into their bodies or disclose medical status to anyone, or to protect people from one another in the name of safety, even in a state of emergency. Legislators and elected officials making laws or statutes to that effect are not constitutional. There are federal statutes that make it a crime for elected officials to conspire to hinder or take away the constitutionally protected rights of their constituents. Every time the school board, the local HD, tries to take away our rights, they're violating these federal statutes that can result in penalties. If a constituent ends up dying because of unconstitutional mandates created by elected officials, there can be severe penalties. You as elected government officials are responsible to defend and support the Constitution. Installed official Joe Biden has no authority to deliver mandates for the vaccine, for all government contractors, employees, private sector employees, and companies greater than 100 people, because it is against constitutional separation of powers. We have unenumerated rights as individuals guaranteed by the Constitution in the 9th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution in Article 1, Section 23 of the state constitution. Biden is trying to get the Department of Labor to take away people's right to freedom of choice when it comes to medical decisions. When there is risk in medical decision-making, there must be choice when it comes to medical decisions. Going to the school board meetings, which we have been doing, coming to this meeting, has everything to do with what President Biden has been mandating. 26 governors and several state attorney generals are fighting these mandates. It makes no sense to have medical freedom in one state or one county and not another. This tells you everything you need to know. It has no medical foundation and is entirely a political move for control. State rights do not override human rights and constitutional rights. Federal mandates, public sector and private sector mandates in terms of mask, vaccine, testing mandates are not constitutional. It is not okay for the installed president, legislator, governor, health department, school board, teachers union to be influencing and making decisions about my child or anyone else's child as it pertains to medical decisions. If any of these entities coerce children into experimental medical treatments without proper parental express consent, this goes against the Nuremberg codes, and these entities are liable for criminal penalties. Parents are holding their leaders accountable, and you as elected officials to represent the people. We hold the sovereign power, and we are against overreaching and ineffective government mandates such as masking, asymptomatic testing, discrimination based on back status through close contact quarantines, and mandatory vaccines. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to address the board? That being said, we'll move into petitions and communications. First up, we have Chris Pinter, the CEO of Bay-Arenac Behavioral Health Community Mental Health Update.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When I was here in June, I told the commission that I would make sure I keep an eye on some of the legislative proposals being floated around related to community mental health. And so I did want to just give you an update today, and I know in the information that you have a copy of the public testimony that we submitted to the Senate related to Senate Bills 597 and 598. In fact, there's a very, very well done Michigan Association of Counties talking points that I got from Commissioner Begic today, which is really well done and really highlights the points in my testimony that I sent in. So I just wanted the commission to know that Senator Shirkey did, in the middle of July, when there was only one session, introduce his Senate bills to privatize the system. He claims that it won't privatize the system, but I'm sorry, if you take 98% of anybody's funding and give it to somebody else, they're out of business. I know of no business that can survive 98% of their money being given to somebody else, private or public. They're just as not. The numbers are too staggering. So I think what the challenge for us is that Michigan, like many other states, have a state and county partnership for public mental health. They built an infrastructure to move people out of state facilities. We used to have 47 state hospitals back in 1959, and we now have 5. We used to have 30,000 people incarcerated most of their lives, and I use the word incarcerated because it wasn't really treatment-based. Now, they treated as best they had at the time, but it certainly isn't treatment-based like it is now in the community with physicians and extenders and practitioners. We wiped that whole system out and put everyone back in the community to either live on their own, live with their families, live with loved ones. And in fact, this commission, not only in 1963 was Bay County one of the first adopters of community mental health, but this county actually did a lot of development of residential back in the mid-'80s. And there was a political price for some of the commissioners at the time because people were scared. They were concerned about group homes. They were concerned about what this would mean And if it wasn't for the partnership of the state and the counties to do that as an endeavor together, it would never have happened. There would not have been an incentive for the county to do that, to move people back to the community, to support them in the community. So this system has been in place about 56 years. It's essentially a constituent-based democratic system. And what I mean by that is if somebody's unhappy with the care they're getting at mental health, they can come to our open public meetings. We have 8 or 9 of them a month on a regular basis. Tell the board to get rid of me. If they still don't like what happens, they can come to this commission and tell the commission to get rid of those authority board members or just get rid of the authority. And if that doesn't work, every 2 years they elect a new commission. So there is ultimately a democratic solution if our services are not meeting the needs of the public. Ultimately, now, some people would say sometimes those are short-term decisions, sometimes the electorate doesn't think long-term, that's all true, but like Winston Churchill said, until we find a better governmental process than democracy, this is the one we kind of have to stick with. So the change for us with these bills is that essentially all this money would go to private health companies, insurance corporations. Some of them are nonprofit, not even located in Michigan. So instead of a Pinconning resident being unhappy that they couldn't access mental health services, they could call Aetna in Minneapolis, because that might be their health plan, versus Commissioner Fox can haul me in front of this commission and work me over. I mean, there is a local accountability to people being able to go to their neighbors that might be their commissioners and say, I don't like what they're doing over there, would you bring it up? You say, well, yeah. That isn't going to happen when the insurance company manages it from far away. They're going to be out of state. They're not going to care what the commission thinks. They're going to have no accountability to the people in this community or in the community Bay-Arenac, and their health care and resource decisions will model that. That's just a reality. One of the other things I've struggled with is when we've talked to the state officials about this, and I can't say that there's momentum at the state to do this. This is very much driven by some private interests tied to the health plans in the Senate. I don't know that the governor believes this is the right way. I know Representative Whiteford actually has an alternative bill in the House that's different than this. Has its own drawbacks, but she's actually trying to improve things versus change of things dramatically. But I think the important point is that whenever you have critical public infrastructure, critical public services, they have to be accountable to those persons in the public, the families, the consumers, and if nothing else, their elected representatives. Because when you don't have that, when some central authority makes a decision who's not accountable to the people it serves or has no accountability to the people's local representatives, you get the Flint water. Well, yeah, it won't be a problem if the lead leaches out. Besides, we don't live there anyway. So you get a decision that was a horrible decision that people in Flint were opposed to at the time, and they were told they didn't know any better, and they needed to shut up and do what the city manager and the appointed city manager. If that city manager lived in Flint and drank that water, I think the decision would have been different, or I think they might have been a little slower to make that decision. That's why you always have to have public accountability. Another example is for Edenville and Sanford. That the Edenville Dam was controlled by a private interest. Everybody who lived on Wixom Lake had a stake in that earthen dam being properly maintained and supported. It wasn't. And it blew up when they had the storm last year. All those people lost all that property value. The owner of that dam, he's not accountable to those folks. He's gonna hide behind bankruptcy court. He'll be protected in law. His losses will be limited. Everybody up there lost all their property value, because a resource that public depended on was managed by a private interest who had no accountability to any of those people. And yes, you can always argue after the fact, well, we'll sue them in court, we'll seek remedy from the courts, but those are after people have been injured and damaged. And when you're talking about people with behavioral health conditions, substance abuse conditions, you can't wait till after they've been damaged to seek some kind of remedy. You need to do something now. And the reason why we have a community-based system is because at the end of the day, they land on the doorsteps of your sheriff department, your county hospital, your county jail, or this commission. Unmet public health needs will always land at the county level. Plain and simple. That's why the county has to have a stake in it, because the county will have to clean up at the end. For whether it's a private interest or a poor public interest, the county will be responsible, because the county is responsible at the end of the day to those constituents locally. Plain and simple. So we don't know that these bills will get a lot of support. What I will say is the Senate Majority Leader is a majority leader because his caucus supported him. He gets his caucus to support him because he has lots of PAC money. That's how it works. I don't think I'm giving anybody a surprise. So he will probably get this through the Senate. We don't know what will happen in the House. But what we do know is it will wipe out the community mental health system, and it will take the critical resources that we have now for people with disabilities and mental health and make them now accountable to private interests who can make those decisions without any concern about the impact on the communities or the families. And that will not do well for the people that we serve. It will increase homelessness, it will increase hospitalizations, it will increase people in jail, it will increase overdoses, it will increase suicides, it will increase unemployment. Plain and simple. And so I think it's important that the commission continue to monitor, advocate for this, and to continue to try to protect the county-based system.
Vaughn.
We had Mary went through the talk to us yesterday on that Health and Human Services Committee, and it sounds like she's open to tweaking this, her plan. One argument she had was that the mental health and the physical health are a lot of times tied together, so it's something better to tie those all together.
Absolutely.
So that was one of her big arguments to that. Now, I don't know if it's best to do it with a big, whatever type of entity to do that. I don't know if there's any other way of doing it.
There is. Can I answer that, Mr. Chair?
Go for it.
Comment? On the last page of my testimony, I do talk about some of the merging models for integrated care, what they call either interpersonal health homes or certified community health clinic, behavioral health clinics. Those are like the FQHCs where you build the substance abuse, the mental health, and the physical health care all in the same visit. So they come into the clinic and they can get all the services there. HMOs don't do that. I mean, they want the money, but when's the last time you went to an HMO provider that had an integrated system? You still go to different specialists, you still go to different practitioners, and HMOs aren't going to necessarily push for that because they want to control the resources. They don't usually direct provide. Now, Kaiser directs provide some in California. There's other nonprofit HMOs that are heavily provider sponsored, so they built some of those services. None of these Medicaid health plans in Michigan do that. This is a traditional model. When you were a practicing person, the person either doesn't need the care or the provider costs too much. And everything that we don't pay for or pay them, I get to put in my pocket. In our system, I don't get to put that money in my pocket. I have to send it back to the county or to the state if we don't spend it. And then I hear from the commissioners as to why aren't we spending more money on services. So it's a closed system. There is no profit gain for anybody. Nobody makes money if homelessness goes up. Nobody makes money if hospitalizations go up. And the privately managed system, their administrative rates, I believe MAC cited a report from last year, was like 21%. You realize in that 21%, not only do they have their profit margin, all of the money they spend on lobbyists, they can count as administrative. We can't spend $1 public money on lobbyists, it's illegal. But if we could take part of that $3 billion in the specialty mental health services spent on lobbyists, there'd be a lot more bills coming out that were pro-county-based system, I can tell you that. The other thing that's important to remember too is that at the end of the day, the state and county partnership actually reduces the liability because we have both a sovereign immunity as a county and we also have state immunity as the state. So I don't have some of the liability. I get liability through MIRMA, just like the county does. And the reason that's manageable is because I'm not a profit enterprise. It's expected that I'm going to serve the most severe, the most people in the community that in most need. That's part of our mission. It's in the statute. It's expected. So I don't have a big high liability price tag for my insurance carrier because I have a limited degree of governmental immunity, provided that we're not negligent. So that also helps us put more money back in care. You lose that when you hand it off to a private interest. You lose that. And what they do is they take the difference, they come back and fund services at 80% on the dollar, the rest goes into profit and CEO salaries and things like that. But that is $400, $500 million a year that would come out of this system. Just using those numbers from their administrative, that's $500 million. It's going to come out of services and county mental health programs. That's where it will come out of. There's no other place. And that will devastate a lot of the services throughout the state, not just in Bay-Arenac counties, but throughout the state. And it doesn't have to be that way.
Very good. Anyone else? Chris, thank you for your time and your information.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Commissioner.
Next up, we have Steve Curry with MAC. Welcome to Bay County.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today. I appreciate it. Appreciate the last minute notice as well of getting me on the agenda. I'll try not to waste your time today. I do have a presentation to go over with you. How you doing, Jim? Feel free to interrupt me as I'm going through the presentation, ask any questions that you may have, or if you prefer to wait until the end, I'm fine with that as well. So first, just a little background on MAC. We have 16 county commissioners on our board, 2 from each of our 6 regions. We typically meet about 4 times a year, at least 4 times a year at our 2 conferences and 2 other times. And our elections for our board happen in our annual conference, which is coming up in September. This is the current MAC leadership. Veronica Kleinfeld is MAC president. She's from Macomb County. Phil Kyers is the first vice president. He's from Ottawa County. And Stan Ponstein is the second vice president, and he is from Kent County. So what is the purpose of MAC? First and foremost, of course, is advocacy. We are the voice of Michigan counties in Lansing. We also do advocacy at the federal level in cooperation with NACO. We provide various educational opportunities. I mentioned the conferences that we host each time of year. We also, over the summer, have regional summits, which are one-day training opportunities. We also put on the New County Commissioner School every 2 years in cooperation with MSU Extension. And finally, we have services that we provide that counties can take advantage of that oftentimes save counties money and time in their jobs. So this is kind of a list of some of the priorities we've been working on this legislative session, and we'll continue on to next year's legislative session. First, I want to talk a little bit about the budget. July 1st is now a deadline that the legislature has to pass a budget. With that being said, there's really no teeth to the legislation. So if they don't pass a budget by July 1st, nothing really happens. What they did pass was kind of a spotty, some of the budget passed, some of it didn't, so they are now working on a budget right now. If they don't pass a budget by the end of September, there will be a state government shutdown. Now, that being said, targets have been set. That's where the legislative leaders set the budget targets. They are now meeting. We do expect them to have a final budget done in the next few weeks before the end of the year. A couple of things I want to highlight on there. You can see some of the things that have been passed so far. What we're expecting in county revenue sharing is a 2% increase in county revenue sharing dollars. That's about the 7th year in a row we've got an increase on county revenue sharing dollars, which is great to see. Some of the other areas I want to highlight, Michigan Indigent Defense grants, $149 million. This is to the change in the Michigan Indigent Defense system. $4 million for the County Veteran Service Fund. That's for every county to take advantage of those grants to provide services to county veterans. And $13 million for secondary road patrol. Secondary road patrol has been hit very hard by COVID. Obviously, without people being on the road, there's less tickets being written, so it's more difficult for the Sheriff's Department to put those folks out on the road. So moving on to American Rescue Plan. I'm sure you guys have talked a lot about this. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it. The interim rule comment period has closed. We are expecting that rule to be finalized by the end of the year, if not early next year. So right now, the interim rule as it stands now is what public entities should be using as guidance. That being said, there's some very good frequently asked questions on there that folks I know are using. We've pre-qualified 4 different vendors to help counties navigate this process. As you know, as county commissioners, this is new for everybody in county government. You guys are used to doing more with less. It's very few opportunities for transformational investment at the county level, and this is really an opportunity. So we're encouraging folks to be pragmatic, take your time. There's some time to spend these dollars, but let's try to be transformational and really change local governments with some of these funds. One of the things we're working on at the state level is working with the state, other local government entities on providing a match program. So this would be an opportunity for the state to put up a certain amount of funds in certain areas, and you can kind of see them listed there, where counties would have the option to match the state, or cities or townships or villages could match the state. We want to make sure these dollars go as far as possible. There's foundation opportunities, partnerships with foundations out there. I'm sure you were hearing from people you never heard of from before in your communities. So I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity out there. We're working with the state and those other interest groups to kind of put a plan together before people start spending these funds. While we don't expect to have anything finalized before the end of the year, we do expect something early next year on that. So getting into our legislative priorities, 4-year county commissioner terms. We are one of 5 states that limit county commissioner terms to 2 years. Our legislation, which we've worked on for as long as I've been at MAC, which is 10 years now, did pass the Senate 32-4, overwhelming support in the Senate, is now in House Local Government Committee, which is chaired by Julie Calley, a former county commissioner from Ionia County. Last legislative session, this legislation passed out of her committee, so we are expecting the same thing to happen with that this legislative session. So stay tuned on that. We don't have a set date for the hearing yet, as the legislature's just getting back into session after their summer hiatus, but we will make sure you are informed when that vote date is set. Reforms for local courts. As you folks know, courts are expensive to operate. They cost a lot of local dollars. The Trial Court Funding Commission was put together about 3 years ago to look at how courts were funded. This was in response to some of the fees that the courts could charge sunsetting. We did get an extension on that sunset. Now it's time to enact some of those reforms to make sure that the courts are properly funded. Everyone is using a consistent system, so communication is better. And these trial court funding recommendations are listed on our website. There's about 7 of them, and legislation will start to be introduced now to reflect some of those recommendations. Local government's finance reforms. This is kind of a list of topics that we've consistently been working on over the years. For those of you that don't know, county revenue sharing is statutory revenue sharing. What that means is that's appropriated each and every year. That means the legislature could appropriate those funds away if they wanted to. They could eliminate county revenue sharing if they chose to. What we were trying to do is set up a county revenue sharing trust fund, which would limit the ability for the legislature to do that. We're working with some legislators right now to set that up because obviously we want to make sure that consistency is there year over year. Mandated services, I mentioned indigent defense. That was one of the newer mandated services that came out of the legislature a few years ago. If you think about the change in the 17-year-olds, moving 17-year-olds out of the adult system into the juvenile system, there was a cost to that. That was a mandated thing from the legislature. That is also going to be funded by the state. So we want to make sure we maintain those mandated services that are funded by the state. One of the newer pieces of legislation that came out of the Upper Peninsula is a tourism reinvestment excise tax for counties. What we've seen is obviously tourism's always been popular in Michigan, but we've seen a huge increase in it due to COVID, due to our Great Lakes, the Upper Peninsula. Well, in a lot of the UP counties, they don't have the infrastructure or the staffing to keep up with the road patrol, to keep up with the EMS. So this would allow a 3% excise tax to be put on hotel beds throughout. This would be any county could do it. Those funds would be restricted to public safety though, so it would have to go to public safety, EMS, and those sorts of needs. If you think about the Raffaele decision a few years ago on the foreclosure process and the issue that caused the county governments, back in the late 90s, there was an option for counties to set the state as the foreclosure unit. We are looking to reopen that window so states could opt out of being the foreclosure unit, which would make the state be the foreclosure unit, to kind of take that off the plate of counties. With that Raffaele decision, that's opening the doors for a lot of problems at the local level. And then finally, special millages on TIFAs and DDAs. This is something we've talked about for a while. Right now, special millages are subject to tax capture districts, DDAs, TIFAs. What we believe and have always spoken on is that we believe those special millages should go towards what those special millages were voted for. So if it's a road patrol millage, veterans millage, senior millage, road repair millage, those should go towards those funds and shouldn't be siphoned off for other purposes. So we're working on that as well. Binding arbitration, this is some legislation that we've often fought against, probably about the last 6 years. This piece of legislation, you can see the bill numbers there, has passed out of the House. This would open up binding arbitration to corrections officers. We oppose the expansion of binding arbitration due to the cost, the long-term liabilities that could be associated with it when third party is making a decision, and also is unequal treatment for the system, so other bargaining units don't get treated equally. So we do oppose that. We will be opposing it in the Senate. The opioid settlement, about $26 billion throughout the country, I believe over 18 years. So Michigan's due to get $800 million. We've been working with the Attorney General's office and some of the attorneys that have represented counties throughout the state on a distribution model for that. You should be seeing an email this Sunday, which would allow the county to opt in. It'll go to board chair, county executive, so there will be some paperwork required there and that's required to be done in, I believe, in the next 15 days. And then there'll be another correspondence that comes out from the executive committee on that settlement team that will have to be responded to in 120 days. So be on the lookout for that email. That's what we wanted to make sure you were aware of. Those funds will be restricted, though, to opioid issues. So whether it's prevention, abatement, things like that, those funds will be restricted as well. And that's set forth by the judge. Mental health, Senate versus House. I don't think I need to go into that much further. You guys got a much more thorough presentation on that than I was going to do, so I'll just kind of skim past this slide, but I will say we do support our CMH partners on this and have always in the past. Property tax exemptions, something we consistently fight the legislature. The legislature oftentimes likes to take votes on things that affect county pocketbooks. We believe if they want to give a property tax exemption, they should reimburse the locals for that property tax exemption. One that comes to mind is the disabled veterans property tax exemption. Right now, there's a few pieces. There's probably about 3 to 4 different pieces of legislation that would actually fix that. So it would still allow for the veteran to get that property tax exemption, but the state would reimburse the locals for that exemption. There's some better models out there than others in those legislation, in those different pieces of legislation. Senator Bumstead has the one that's probably going to be the best one that we're looking at. That hasn't been quite introduced, but once it does, we will make sure to pass that bill number along so you guys can help us out with it. Human Services, I spoke a little bit about this already. This talks about 17-year-olds and the Raise the Age Fund, just making sure those are 100% covered by the state. 911 funding sunset. So the 911 Service Enabling Act expires at the end of the year. This is how 911 services are funded throughout the state. And with the advancement of Next Gen 911 and the technology that is required for that, we want to make sure that doesn't go away. And there's some changes that would help fund that Next Gen 911. So you're looking at an increased prepaid surcharge from 5 to 6.5%, increased postpaid fees from 5 cents to 7 cents. Now, that being said, with those increases, there is a mechanism in that legislation that would roll back the fees should there be more revenue generated than what is needed to fund that Next Gen 911. So this bill is sponsored by Rep. Callie again out of Ionia, and we do expect to see some movement on this pretty quickly. And then, of course, infrastructure. This kind of talks a little bit about some of the infrastructure expectations laid out in the budget. Infrastructure, the definition of infrastructure is always expanding. It's now, no longer just roads and bridges, but broadband is falling in there. We've got PFAS issues, water safety issues, pipes, things like that. So huge need for that. Of course, the federal government is working on a huge package of bills to address that as well. We just wanted to make you aware we are keeping our eye on it, and we'll keep you informed as much of the information as we get. That's kind of legislative pieces. There are policy committees that meet. We have 6 of them. They meet typically from September to June. Folks are more than welcome to participate. You don't need to come to Lansing. You can participate remotely. We had a remote option long before COVID, so we usually have about half and half participate remotely versus in person. You can see when they meet. There's an application on our website, and we'd love to have you participate if you have the time. We do have a MAC PAC. It's a smaller PAC. It supports 31 county commissioners that are now serving in the legislature. We call that our MAC County Caucus. Our job is to remind those folks of the challenges they had when they sat on the county commission and not let them forget once they get to Lansing, all the issues and things like that they worked on. So we appreciate any support you folks can provide for that. This is our MAC Government Affairs team. Dina Bosworth, our Director of Government Affairs. She handles mostly our general government, tax policy, transportation, environmental issues. Megan Kite-Corian from here in Bay City.
Bay City.
Yeah. She handles our health and human services and judiciary issues. And Hannah Sweeney's our government affairs assistant. And if you ever have a question and don't know where to go, you can email Hannah and she will point you in the right direction. I mentioned our annual conference coming up at the end of the month on Mackinac Island. We also have our legislative conference coming up this spring. The legislative conference is always held in Lansing, and it's always typically in that March timeframe. These are our Mac communication tools, Facebook, Twitter. We do a podcast every week that's about 20 minutes long, Instagram. Hopefully you're getting our weekly legislative update that's providing some information. We also have a printed newsletter that now comes out every other month, just hopefully providing you with all the information you need in a variety of different ways for you to get it. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Begay.
Well, my Michigan Counties Magazine, and we're working on this, the consultants for the ARPA money. And I know we went through the vetting process with Gulf Pro Plus, and I was gonna mention it today, but we're here. So appreciate you doing the vetting on these vendors to see that they're reputable people.
Yeah, those were publicly vetted through Livingston County, actually, and then they made that contract piggybackable to everyone in the state, so very similar to like a My Deal program.
County Gazette, Mr. Barker.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Steve for his presentation today, and also indicate that Bay County and I know Vaughn's on your board, your state board, and we all appreciate the very strong leadership and advocacy on behalf of counties, and especially on the revenue sharing, but all of the points that you touched on today were excellent, and again, just a real tribute to your energy, your enthusiasm, your knowledge of local government, and at both the federal and state levels advocating for local government, especially counties. But
well, thank you.
Excellent presentation, Steve.
Thank you. Well, we've got a great team at MAC. Dina and Megan, they do a great job, and they're bulldogs on their issues and are very well respected in Lansing as well. So thank you for that.
Commissioner Fox.
I have one question for you.
Sure.
Are you well versed in the infrastructure bill?
The federal one?
Yeah, the one that's 5.2 billion going to MDOT, but 3.5 of the government bonds all going to fix Detroit and the surrounding area, and Michigan's way bigger than that. So how much of that do the rest of us get to benefit from?
So that goes back to the governor put together that bond plan probably about now 4 years ago to bond for MDOT roads. So that's only MDOT roads that the state can bond for.
Okay. All right.
Now, some of those federal funds will trickle through, I believe, our PA 51 formula, which would get down to your local road commission. So I think the breakdown's like 35% of federal funds would come down to locals through that federal package, whatever that number ends up being.
Well, I would love it if somebody in that space advocate for us areas that are north a little bit, because we have icky roads too.
Oh, yeah. And when you start getting into PA 51, that's the distribution formula for road dollars. So whether it's gas tax dollars, registration fees, it gets very convoluted. And we've probably got some training sessions on our website if you ever really want to dig into it. And we actually have a session on the island on it, on PA 51 too. So if there's ever any more information you want on that, we definitely have it available for you.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? Steve, thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. So let's take care of a little housekeeping. I'd like to back up to the presentation that was given by Chris. Motion to receive would be in order. So
Support.
any discussion? With none, all those in favor signal by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. And then I'd like to have a motion to receive Steve's presentation for Mac.
Support.
Discussion. With none, all those in favor signal by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next on our petitions and communications is for us to concur with the incumbents for the Republican and Democratic Party would be Janice Pearson and Tracy Parmenter.
So moved.
Support.
Discussion. All those in favor signal by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. I'd like to come back now to Joel Strauss under Petitions and Communications. Joel, if you could give us a...
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been asked today to give an update on the current situation with the virus here in Bay County and where we're going and some things that we're doing to help mitigate the spread of the virus here in the community. So I want to take you back to about 2 months ago. We were during the months of June and July, we were at the lowest periods of virus activity since the beginning of the pandemic. And we averaged about maybe a case or two a day at that point in time. Currently, we're averaging anywhere between 18 to 25 cases per day. And on certain days, we actually reach up to 50. Now, this is nowhere close to the high point that we had prior to Christmas or after Easter. But this is all primarily due to the Delta variant and its transmissibility. It is 4 times as transmissible, if not more, than previous strains of the virus or the original strain of the virus. And as a result, we're seeing increases in cases and increases in the number of serious cases. A lot of these cases that are coming and that are happening currently are because of in-school transmission. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But in addition to that, we're seeing fairly sizable increases in the number of hospitalizations and persons in the intensive care unit. At this point in time, 2 months ago, we only had 1 person in the hospital, no one in the ICU. About a month ago, that number had risen to about 8 people in the hospital and still about maybe 2 people in the ICU. Today, we have 25 people in the hospital and 8 people in the ICU, and 3 of them are vented. We've had a handful of deaths in the last 3 weeks as a result of that. And almost all of these are exclusively amongst the unvaccinated. We do have regular conversations with the folks in McLaren Bay region. And with that, about 9 out of 10 people that are actually admitted to the hospital and have serious cases are unvaccinated. So we're redoubling our efforts as much as we possibly can to get people vaccinated. But however, we've kind of reached a saturation point at this point in time. We do anticipate as the variant grows that we will probably see increases in the number of people that are wanting to get vaccinated. Maybe they've been sitting on the fence for one reason or another, or maybe that they just didn't believe that the vaccination was necessary, but it is. And the best way I can describe this as I talked to the Pinter County School Board last night is you got to think of the Delta variant is a forest fire and unvaccinated persons are dry tinder and they will be thoroughly consumed by COVID, and hopefully they won't have serious illness. But as you probably are aware of what's going on down south, whether it's in Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Texas, Missouri, and now starting in Kentucky and South Carolina, it is really ravaging unvaccinated communities. So all that being said, we're doing our best to try to mitigate spread, but to maintain life as normal as possible. At this point in time last year, there was no vaccine. There were no standardized treatments. That has changed. The vaccine is readily available. People that are vaccinated are 10 times less likely to have serious illness and end up in the hospital, and 10 times less likely to die as a result of COVID-19 than a person that is unvaccinated. But one of the ways that we know that COVID is spread is obviously through close contact and enclosed spaces, and schools are a particular concern to us. And we've been working with the schools diligently since the month of July to try to prepare for this. We have seen substantial transmission in all of the schools, whether it's public or private. The county in particular has been hit relatively hard, but they have not had to close down school because we have our test to stay policy. So if I just might talk about that for a few minutes, back in the month of May, when a number of concerns were brought to us, and we were having to try to manage school quarantines, we consulted with Harvard University and were able to determine that if we could keep a student that was normally considered a close contact in school if we have them test for the first 5 days after exposure and then on day 7 and day 9. And that way, if we can catch them, and if the testing is done prior to entry to school, if we can catch them if they're positive before that they expose themselves to others or expose to others and have more close contacts. But at the same time, we're able to determine too that with these mitigation efforts, we were able to keep a number of those students in school. Now, that was done prior to the Delta variant, and we had 71 students participate in that program in the spring. And for the most part, 98% were able to stay in school. And at the other, we were able to, identify 2% of the students overall. The one thing that's different, though, as I've said before, is that the Delta variant is pretty virulent and it spreads quite easily. And so it's been able to really spread pretty methodically through the schools, and Penn County has been hit extremely hard. Now, they made the decision, their school board made the decision last night to institute masking for the time being. I believe that Essexville-Hampton has done the same thing for their early 5th through the 5th grade programs over there. But we are still in consultation with all of the schools. Now, a number of people ask us on both ends of the spectrum, why aren't you just instituting orders, or why do you need to institute an order at all? Number one, we institute an order as a means of last resort. We try to work with schools and organizations and businesses to have them come up with their own mitigation strategies. When we feel that there is no other way around this, if we have to do something, we'll issue an order. We did issue an order in the last 3 weeks to institute the test to stay program. That was done so that we can legally institute these programs within the schools. And for the most part, they are working very well. No school has had to shut down because of transmission or outbreaks. We're able to keep kids in school, and I think that's an important thing. I think it's also important to realize that the test to stay program has been adopted by a number of different counties here in Michigan, including Midland County, Livingston County, Ingham County, and Washtenaw County, and a number of others. And the state has come up with some guidelines for their own variation of this program as well. So it's one of the things that we're being lauded upon by both state and national entities. But all that being said, we have quite a bit of a road in front of us with this Delta variant. We hope that the numbers don't rise in the hospital, and we are working diligently with the hospital to make sure that that doesn't happen. And the only way that we can do this is by 5 main points. Number one is to get as many people vaccinated as possible. The vaccines are safe and effective, and they've been approved by the FDA. Second thing is to make sure that when people are monitoring their health, that they stay home when they're sick and they get tested regularly if they're not vaccinated, and especially get tested if they are symptomatic. Third thing is to make sure that schools, businesses, organizations, churches have good ventilation and distancing practices so that there's not super spreader events that are taking place within the county here. And finally, it's just making sure that everybody is on board with all of this and making sure that people stay sick when they're home. So all that being said, as I stated before, we have a different set of tools than we did last year, but we have some significant challenges in the coming weeks and months.
Questions for Joel? Mr. Conan?
Thanks, Joel. It doesn't look like we're going to get enough people vaccinated. We had somebody here speaking today about constitutional rights and things like this. So if we don't get enough people vaccinated, the next variant could be even stronger than this Delta variant. So how do we go about addressing that? I mean, is there a new one, is there a new variant coming down the pipeline anytime soon?
Well, there are variants of interest and variants of concern that are identified either by CDC or the World Health Organization. Our major concern, though, right now is the Delta variant, and that seems to crowd out all the other variants. But it is very plausible that we could have a variant that is more transmissible and that evades vaccination or prior infection. The more people that we get vaccinated sooner, the better, and that will help us stop the virus in its tracks. If you look at some of the other countries that have 80-90% vaccination rates, particularly like Iceland, Germany, and Portugal are doing a very good job. Those are countries where they're pretty much have stopped the virus in its tracks or really have kept it down. They're also employing to a greater extent rapid testing both within the home and within workplaces. And I think that's another thing too. I mean, we use that right now in the schools, but I really would highly encourage that to be used within workplaces and at home so that people understand and can tell in a timely basis whether or not that they're infectious or not. So I think those are the major things. Now, there's been a lot of talk too about whether or not that third doses are necessary. And there's still quite a considerable debate that's going on between FDA and CDC on that. I do anticipate that by the end of the week or by the beginning of next week, we'll have some more clear and definitive pathways of whether or not that we need to give third doses or not.
Sure.
Anyone else? Mr. Begay.
So right now, are we doing that close contact 5 days, 7-9? Is that in effect right now then?
That is correct, Mr. McKay.
Administered at the school, or how is that done? Is there a process for that?
So the way that it works is, number one, the school has to be on board to do it. And then number two, the parent has to consent. So a parent of the student has to consent to be tested for that. So if a person is identified as a confirmed positive case, we work with the schools to identify who are the close contacts. And then we get with the parents of that particular student or of those students and say, number one, your student was identified or your child was identified as a close contact. There's an order for quarantine. And then within that order for quarantine, there's the option given to do the testing or the test to stay program, as we call it here in Bay County. And so if they opt to do the test to stay program, they work with the school to test prior to entry on those days. Now, in quite a bit of the time, we don't find out about confirmed positive cases status until maybe 2 or 3 days after exposure. And so, all in all, there's 7 days of testing that we have prescribed, but usually that's truncated down to anywhere to 3 to 5 tests. Because typically we don't find out until about 2 to 3 days after exposure that someone is positive. And so that's an important reason too, why we want to catch students and even staff if that may be asymptomatic and carriers of that. And we use rapid antigen tests. We don't use PCR tests. And the reason that we use the rapid antigen test is that those antigen tests tell us or are good indicators of whether or not that a person has an active case of the virus and is contagious to others, where PCR just really measures the presence or absence of the virus within a person. So they may have had a previous infection, but that would show up in a PCR test, even though that they're recovered and are no longer contagious to others. But the rapid antigen test actually does show that a person is contagious. If a student does test positive with that antigen test, they are referred for follow-up with the PCR to confirm, and then they're excluded from school for 10 days of isolation, as would be any other positive case.
Thank you.
Commissioner Fox.
Hey, Joel, can you talk a little bit about someone who has had COVID previously, and what is your recommendation for that person still to get vaccinated? Are they safe or safe is not the right word choice, but, you know, are they immune from contracting COVID? Can you just talk about what would be the best for that individual?
So that's a good question, Commissioner. So the question is whether or not that previous COVID infection incurs enough natural immunity that's better than the vaccine. And while there is natural immunity, and that in some cases that natural immunity can extend, it's better to be vaccinated than just to rely on natural immunity. It's not very often, but it's not unheard of that a person that has had previous COVID infection can get infected again. In fact, we've had several instances of that here in Bay County. But that's why we recommend that even if you do have natural immunity or had a previous COVID case, when you are done with your isolation period and recovered, we recommend that you get vaccinated. It can be a vaccination, you know, if you're old enough to get the Johnson & Johnson, or it can be Pfizer or Moderna. You know, and the science is evolving on this as well. I would not be surprised to see that within a few months' time that CDC and FDA would state that natural immunity plus 1 dose of the vaccine, or 1 dose of a vaccine, would constitute the same protection as both doses of the vaccine.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Commissioner Johnson.
Yeah, Joel, I just want to ask you so that I know I have it straight and I understand it correctly, so that if anybody's listening, they understand it as well. The test to stay policy. So if you have a student who did test positive, they would then go and contact the school to identify close contacts, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And those close contacts would then, from the time that they were exposed, have to quarantine for a term of 5 days. Is that right?
No, that is not correct. So they're given the option to either quarantine for 10 days, or they can stay in school pending they are asymptomatic and begin the testing regimen under the test to stay policy.
So when would they then test? So when would they have to test?
So as I said before, the test days that we establish are 5 days post-exposure. So let's say that I was in school on Monday and came down sick and tested on Tuesday, and we notified your school and you were a close contact of me. So assuming that you didn't get that notification until Tuesday afternoon, you would be given a notice of quarantine. And in that quarantine order, you would be given the choice to either quarantine for 10 days or start the testing process. So already 1 day has passed since the initial exposure. So then we would have Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So that would bring us to day 4. Now we wouldn't test on Saturday, which would be day 5, because school's not in session. We don't expect you to go back to school just to be tested on a day off. Day 7 would come generally on Monday. So we would test you on Monday, and then we would test you again next Wednesday on day 9. And as long as you're asymptomatic and you test negative, you can stay in school.
Okay, so that same student would be tested multiple times. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yes. That's correct.
Okay. All right, thank you, Joel.
Mr. Varsha.
Joel, I know you're in regular contact with school administrators, board members, and superintendents here in Bay County and the 4 districts. Could you share with us what other mitigation efforts are being taken? I know Superintendent Bigelow spoke to the Lions Club. Vaughn and I were there last Tuesday and indicated they had invested in some air purification systems, as well as, I believe, ultraviolet light and other ways to try to make sure that there's a clean, virus-free environment. And then also, I did get a question from one parent who asked, I believe that their preference would be for the saliva test as opposed to the nasal test. But when I asked you about that, I think you indicated that test takes longer to get the results back. It's a little more expensive, but it also takes about 48 hours to get the result back as opposed to the quick test that you can get done in 15 minutes.
Sure. So I'll talk about the mitigation strategies, and then I'll talk about the testing that we've got currently. So the mitigation strategies, as I've stated before, is we've been in contact with all of the school districts and all of the schools, whether they're public or private, really since the beginning of last year, but more importantly for this year, in regular communication with them on a weekly basis, and sometimes on a daily basis since July. So as I mentioned before, there are a number of different strategies that we highly recommend or want to have in place. The first one is masking, the first one is vaccination for those that are eligible. And, vaccinations are not mandated at schools for students or anything like that, nor is there, we do not have any authority to mandate vaccinations at schools. That really takes an act of the legislature here in Michigan, and it's not something that I, as health officer or the county board, can mandate. You have to wait for the state to mandate that. Now, whether or not that worksite mandates via the president's executive order, that's a federal decision, and that really affects the worksite, not necessarily the school. So vaccinations are a key thing, as I mentioned before. Masks are another thing, but masks are not the only thing, because not all masks are created equal. Not everybody wears a mask correctly. You really need a good, tight-fitting mask, usually one that's 3-ply. There's been talk a lot about, whether or not that kids should wear N95s. N95s, they're normally called respirators, but they're just really thick masks that you wear in a healthcare environment. Quite typically, you have to be fit tested on an annual basis for it. But there are a number of different masks that are just as good out there for students. And the number of studies that have shown that masks are effective, cloth masks are effective, are numerous. So that's one thing, but it's the individual school district's decision at this point in time to institute a mask policy. Now, all that being said, as I said before, is that there are other strategies that are just as important. Ventilation is a key factor, whether or not that it's just opening windows or making sure that you have good cross currents of fresh air coming in. A number of schools, and we've provided guidance on this, have purchased and or are looking into buying air purifiers with HEPA filters, and that can do a great deal of good. In addition to that, cohorting students, so you don't have a wide mixing of students and have wide numbers of students that are exposed to a positive case, is a good thing. It's not always easy to do that at the 6th through 12th grade level, but it's a lot easier to do that at the grade school or elementary school level. And then finally, distancing and making sure that sick students are really being kept out of school, and that there is early identification via testing of those that could be potential spreaders of the virus. And so, for the most part, not every school is going to have a perfect situation, but with the current Test to Stay program and with the guidance that we've been given to schools, we're fairly confident that we can have an uninterrupted school year. We do know that there's going to be bumps along the way. And until that we can get the vaccine that's available for everyone, that's going to be, kind of hindering us in our approach, but it's an important thing. Now, finally, you asked about whether or not that antigen tests that use saliva. I'm not aware of one that's currently approved by the FDA is available here in the United States. Most antigen tests that are available use a nose swab. It's not the same kind of swab as you would get in a PCR test, where you got to go all the way back the nasal pharyngeal area. But the test that we use, which is the Binax now, is pretty effective, and it actually gives test results. It can take up to 15 minutes, but it's been our experience that it's anywhere between 5 to 7 minutes. Now, the other thing about that is most of the tests that do use saliva are PCR tests. And number one, as you mentioned before, Jim, that those tests are expensive. You've got to send them to a complex laboratory that does complex testing to do the test. And it often takes anywhere between 24 to 48 hours to get those test results back. So it's not really an option for us now. But I do anticipate that with the president's executive order, and especially expansion of testing at schools, that there could be some sorts of antigen tests that do use saliva. And if that's the case, then yeah, absolutely, we would look into it.
Yeah, thank you, Joel. And for those students that don't want to, or the parents don't want their children tested or vaccinated, and they're quarantined, if they don't want to be tested, that they still have access. All of our school districts have virtual learning for those students that would be quarantined for not the full 10 days, because 10 calendar days, not 10 school days, correct?
That's correct, yes.
So if they were out for 4 or 5 days, if they chose not to be, or the parents chose not to test their children at school, then they would have the option of keeping up with their class instruction through virtual learning at home, or not learning, but virtual classes.
That is my assumption, but we have authority and control over the testing and the medical option, but not necessarily the educational options within each school district or every particular school. But it's my assumption that virtual learning is usually offered to those students.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Joe.
Anyone else? That being said, Joel, I appreciate it very much. A motion to receive his report would be in order.
So moved. Support.
Any other discussion on it? That being said, all those in favor signal by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We'll move into resolutions and of reports for the committees, Ways and Means. That would bring up Commissioner Fox.
Okay. Resolution number 2021-131, the refunding of the bonds for the Bay Area water treatment plant. I move this resolution.
Support.
Discussion. With none, all those in favor signal by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Number 2021-132, the grant application for the Sheriff Road Patrol. I move this resolution.
Support?
Discussion. With none, all those in favor signal by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Number 2021-133, the health insurance rate adjustment. I move this resolution.
Support.
Discussion. With none, all those in favor signal by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Number 2021-134, the base TV sponsorship agreements for the 2021-22 year. I move this resolution.
Support.
Discussion. With none, all those in favor signal by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries.
Number 2021-135, the utilization of the county seal on the Bay County senior bound residents. I move this resolution.
Support.
Discussion. With none, all those in favor signal by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries.
Number 2021-136, the federal transportation planning funds and asset management funds according to the fiscal year 2022 Unified Work Program. I move this resolution.
Support.
Discussion. With none, all those in favor signal by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries.
Number 2021-137, the general fund payables. I move this resolution.
Support.
Discussion. With none, all those in favor signal by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries.
Number 2021-138, the annual adjustment to the fund balance for the budget stabilization as of 12/31/2020. I move this resolution.
Support.
Discussion. With none, all those in favor signal by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries.
Number 2021-139, the contract with Republic Services for waste and recycling services. I move this resolution.
Support.
Discussion. With none, all those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries.
Number 2021-140, the budget adjustments for the child care fund. I move this resolution.
Support.
Discussion. With none, all those in favor signal by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries.
Number 2021-141, the agreement with Text-My-Gov. I move this resolution.
Support.
Discussion. With none, all those in favor signal by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries.
Number 2021-142, the agreement with Guidehouse Consulting for consulting services regarding the American Rescue Plan Act. I move this resolution.
Support.
Discussion. Mr. Cohen.
Yeah, just so I know that they're not going to be given any fees, and we haven't even decided or discussed what we're going to be doing with this ARP money. So at some point, within the next couple of years, we're going to have $20 million. So anytime that they won't be, we're not going to cut them a check for anything until we actually start to discuss this.
Jan?
The only thing that we are in talks with them is actually reviewing our revenue calculator, so that, which shows our losses. So that was an estimated cost of like $300 on that, and that's
I
part
saw
of
that,
that.
yeah.
So that is the only discussions we have had with them. So that is something we could do right away.
Sure, I
Have them
understand that.
verify our losses is all.
But any other money being transferred or cut to them is coming to us first.
Correct,
Okay.
correct. We would not use them in any sense.
Maybe we don't even need them, but who knows? I mean, it's there if we do.
Correct, correct.
Anyone else? That being said, all those in favor signal by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries.
Number 2021-143, the agreement with the Boys and Girls Club for summer recreational programs. I move this resolution.
Support.
Discussion. With none, all those in favor signal by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries.
And I turn it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Fox, thank you very much. We'll move into Personnel and Human Services. That brings up Commissioner Johnson.
Thank you, sir. I'll begin with resolution number 2021-144 with vacancies and new positions: 911, Central Dispatch, Sheriff's Office, Department on Aging, Juvenile Home, Office of Criminal Defense, the Health Department, and Community Corrections Personnel. I move this resolution.
Support.
Discussion. With no discussion, all those in favor signal by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries.
All right, I'd like to move into actually resolution 2021-146. That one is from personnel, that is from the probate court, notified of work being completed under the direction of the Michigan Indigent Defense Commission. Probate Juvenile Court is requesting a temporary position not to exceed 15 hours per week, funded through December 31st, 2021, to assist in the timely completion of duties until a long-term resolution can be found. Move this resolution. Support.
Discussion. Commissioner Fox.
Yes, when we talked about this resolution at the Personnel Committee meeting, I had asked that it not to exceed $3,000, which was their estimate for funding this position. And I don't see where that was added to the resolution, so I would like that to be added. I don't know if that requires a separate resolution, Mr. Parliamentarian.
Any comments? Jeff, anything on it?
I don't have any comments on it because that came directly from the court. It doesn't really go through personnel.
And obviously, we have no one from the courts to address it, so If you,
When they talked about it at that time, her estimate was $3,000.
okay,
Yeah.
so if we amend the resolution to add not to exceed $3,000,
I'll support that.
okay? Commissioner Coonan?
Just a quick question. This Michigan Indigent Defense Commission, a couple of years ago, the gal came from the state. Is that related to this, the work that they're doing?
No.
Go ahead.
Commissioner Coonan, this is work that's being covered by the probate court that previously was being covered basically on a gratis basis by the public defender's office. It's not something that is actually paid for through Michigan Indigent Defense Commission. They were just doing it on their own before the change in the state came through and the funding came through. Since the additional mandates have been put in place, the public defender's office made the determination that that was not a responsibility they could continue providing. And NDIC did not pay for the attorneys in the office to provide that service. So they basically informed the probate court, we're not going to be providing this service anymore because it technically does not fall under the Michigan Indigent Defense Commission. And so the probate court at this point in time is just trying to do a little bit of catch up and picking up that additional work that they're trying to absorb into other positions.
And I see we have Andrea. I'm sorry, I missed you on the screen.
That's okay. Everything Amber said is correct. I think, you know, we've all dealt with grants and how very specific they are and what money can be spent on. And we were doing things for quite a while. That was not our responsibility. We can't any longer. We have additional responsibilities as well. So it became a problem. And I think giving some of the work back to them might have caused an issue.
Go ahead, Kim.
Well, who was doing the work before?
Before we were doing the work?
Right. Or before the Michigan Indigent Defense Commission decided they're not doing or paying for it. Who was doing the work before?
Before it was when when the Office of Assigned Counsel was under circuit court. So Office of Assigned Counsel was doing it. So it came under MIDC. Then I believe we continued it for a while, and then the grant requirements for what probate had as well increased as to how their billing had to be done, how frequently and what kind of tracking had to be done. And our responsibilities increased, and also it just is outside of our funding.
Okay. Any other questions? With that being said, all those in favor signal by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
And that is all from me for today.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson.
Thank you.
We'll move into Board of Commissioners. Commissioner Coonan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. From the Board of Commissioners, we have Resolution 2021-145, reports of the county executive. I move this resolution.
Support.
Discussion. With none, all those in favor signal by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We'll move into reports of county officials and departments. Mr. Barsha.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have a lot. I just wanted to compliment Commissioner Vaughn Begic and all of the great membership of the Bay City Lions Club for the Pawpalooza, which was held on Saturday, and by far the most successful event held. It was the third, no, it wasn't held last year, was it? So was this second or third? Third. So, yeah, it was a success. We were out for most of the day, and a lot of people had a good time, saw a lot of pets, and people were paying to walk their dogs and walk other dogs. So it was a great event. Sandy Fisk, the former president of the Bay City Lions Club, took that on as a project, and I was amazed at how many of the Lions were out volunteering, and it was a successful event. And thank you, Vaughn, for all the time you donated. And also our animal shelter and Craig Gillette worked closely with Sandy and hope to even work closer next year. But the event was held next to the animal shelter at the Bay County Fairgrounds, and good turnout for the duration of the event from 9 until 2 o'clock. So a very successful event. Just wanted to report that, and already spoken a little earlier on the agenda, so we'll let it go. And until I'll give a more full update perhaps at the next, on other issues at the next board meeting.
Very good, thank you. Do we have any unfinished business? Any new business? Anything under miscellaneous?
Yeah,
Mr. Fox?
I would just like to remind folks that on next Wednesday, 9/22, the Santa Paws fundraiser at the band shell in Pinconning. It's a fundraiser for the dog park. You can get your photo taken with your pet and Santa. There will be treats, and come out and support the cause.
Very good. Any other announcements? Mr. Begay?
There will be a POW MIA ceremony this Friday, the 17th, at the Bay County Vietnam Veterans Memorial, also called the Helicopter Memorial. It's an actual date of the recognition day for POW MIAs. And there'll be a brief ceremony in the color guard, and some other ceremonies are led by the 7 p.m.
7 p.m.?
Yeah, right.
Thank you. Under appointments, in October, we have a Land Bank Authority. It's a 1 3-year term at large. We also have Department of Health and Human Services Board of Directors, a 1 3-year term. That again is a governor's appointment. In November, we have a Building Authority, which is a 2 6-year term. And in December, we have Veterans Affairs Committee, 2 4-year terms. And also in December, we have Department of Aging Advisory Committees, 4 2-year terms, and these are the districts 1, 3, 5, and 7, just for a reminder. And then, Ms. Amber, is there a need for a closed session?
There's no.
Very good. And I'm sorry, Commissioner Johnson, did you have something you wanted to say?
Not at this time.
Then we'll go to Commissioner Coonan.
Move to adjourn.
Oh, yeah,
That sounded
Do I have a support?
Support.
All right, all those in favor, signal by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? We are done. Thank you.